Good morning, evening, or night, wherever you are. Welcome to WHAM today. Take a deep breath, clear your mind, and let's drift through the whispers of today's world, one quiet thought at a time. As we wrap up Sunday, 11th May 2025, let's see what stories are unfolding around us. China is navigating a complex landscape of economic and international relations. Trade negotiations with the U.S. to resolve the trade war, initiated by former President Donald Trump's tariffs, have included discussions in Switzerland attended by U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, with both sides reporting progress toward de-escalating trade tensions. Yunnan province is boosting agricultural imports from ASEAN countries, its largest trading partner, with a 26.5% increase in the first quarter. Although electric vehicle exports to the UK have decreased, plug-in hybrid EV exports rose significantly by 18.49% year-on-year in March, reaching 3,898 units. China's energy investments in Africa are increasingly focused on renewable sources like solar and wind power. Starbucks and Luckin are expanding coffee sales in smaller Chinese cities, signifying growth potential in lower-tier markets. Reflecting a shift from production to consumption, Chinese consumers are showing increased national pride by purchasing local products. The Michelin Guide, the Black Pearl Restaurant Guide, is expanding its cultural influence by rating restaurants in Japan and Southeast Asia, tailored for Chinese palates. In military affairs, China is hosting a delegation of 100 African military officers for training in air basics, China's military system, and technology models. The relationship between China's leader, Xi Jinping, and Russia's President, Vladimir Putin, remains significant. Turning to the United States, the country has engaged in multiple rounds of trade negotiations with China, including discussions in Switzerland, to resolve the trade war initiated by former President Donald Trump's tariffs. U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent attended these meetings aimed at easing trade tensions that have impacted financial markets. Finally, the Philippines' midterm elections could influence the country's strategic alignment during President Ferdinand Marcos Jr.'s term, particularly in relation to China. Japan is focused on bolstering international ties and addressing domestic concerns. In its outreach to Chile, Japan seeks closer collaboration in the mining industry, recognizing Chile's critical role as a copper and lithium supplier. Trade talks with the U.S. will prioritize the removal of U.S. tariffs on Japanese automobiles, highlighting the significance of the U.S. market. Cooperation with the U.K. will center on streamlining personal data transfers to benefit Japanese academic and research institutions studying clinical trial and disease data. On the home front, a Japanese government study revealed that 39% of Japanese citizens experience loneliness, prompting new legislation to combat this problem. The Don Quixote discount chain is benefiting from a surge in tourist shopping, driven by its treasure hunt atmosphere. Fui Prefectural University has launched Japan's first dinosaur department, offering students hands-on fossil excavation and research opportunities. Japan's Coast Guard is struggling with a staffing shortage amid persistent territorial disputes with China, particularly regarding the Diaoyu Island. A Chinese research vessel operating in Japan's exclusive economic zone, EEZ, was asked by the Japan Coast Guard to halt its activities. Moving to South Korea, a South Korean temple returned a 14th century Buddha statue to a Japanese temple, complying with a Supreme Court decision acknowledging the Japanese temple's rightful ownership. The statue had been stolen in 2012. Turning to China, its relations with Japan are strained by ongoing territorial disputes, especially over the Diaoyu Islands, which contributes to staffing issues for the Japanese Coast Guard. The presence of a Chinese research vessel within Japan's exclusive economic zone, EEZ, led to a request from a Japanese patrol ship for the vessel to cease its activities. In a separate incident, 3 Chinese nationals were apprehended in Japan for allegedly operating an illegal poker den in a condominium, where they reportedly collected a 5% commission from winnings. Pope Leo XIV began his pontificate by calling for a just and lasting peace in Ukraine, a ceasefire and humanitarian aid in Gaza, and expressed his approval of the truce between India and Pakistan. He also advocated for the release of all hostages held in conflict zones. Regarding the conflict in Ukraine, Russian President Vladimir Putin has proposed talks with Ukraine. His offer was immediately met with skepticism from multiple world leaders. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky signaled a willingness to engage in direct talks with Russia later this week, but only if Moscow commits to an unconditional ceasefire starting May 12. General Keith Kellogg, a Trump envoy, supports a ceasefire first, talks later approach. French President Emmanuel Macron and German Chancellor Friedrich Merz both voiced their opinion that Putin's proposal was insufficient, insisting that an unconditional ceasefire must come before any negotiations. The German Chancellor emphasized that a ceasefire with Ukraine should be the first step. The UK Prime Minister declared that Europe and the US are advocating for a 30-day unconditional ceasefire starting Monday in response to Putin's proposal. United States. President Donald Trump announced a total reset in US-China trade relations after initial talks in Geneva. US Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick indicated that British plane parts, including Rolls-Royce engines, would be exempt from US import tariffs as part of a developing trade agreement. Trump criticized the US media, labeling it fake news and questioning its innocence. Former workers at the Department of Health and Human Services, HHS, now led by Robert F. Kennedy Jr., warned that mass terminations and budget cuts could result in missed disease outbreaks. Additionally, President Trump claimed that the U.S. played a role in brokering a ceasefire between India and Pakistan. Russia and Ukraine. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky voiced optimism regarding potential ceasefire. Talks with Russia, interpreting Russia's openness to ending the war as a positive indicator and confirming his readiness for discussions. Vladimir Putin proposed direct talks with Ukraine in Istanbul on May 15, without preconditions, aiming for a truce that fosters lasting peace and prevents Ukrainian rearmament. Weighing in, President Trump predicted imminent progress in peace talks between Russia and Ukraine in a post to Truth Social. India and Pakistan. President Trump's claim that the U.S. helped broker a ceasefire between India and Pakistan was met with skepticism, as residents reported explosions over Indian-held Kashmir shortly after his announcement. Israel continues to grapple with the ongoing Gaza war. Israeli strikes, especially in Khan Yunis, have caused numerous civilian deaths. 9 people, mostly women and children, died in recent attacks. 2 strikes hit tents in Khan Yunis, each killing 2 children and their parents. NASA Hospital received the deceased. The case of 6-month-old Siwar Ashar, suffering from malnutrition, underscores the severe humanitarian crisis due to the war and aid blockade. Thousands of Israeli protesters in Tel Aviv are demanding an end to the conflict and the release of captives. Hamas released a video showing 2 Israeli hostages alive, one pleading for an end to the prolonged conflict. Turning to the United States, President Donald Trump intends to visit the Middle East to pursue trade and investment deals with Gulf allies. Notably, the trip will not include a stop in Israel, reflecting continuing tensions linked to the Gaza war. South Korea's political arena is characterized by strong divisions, exemplified by the contrasting platforms of presidential hopefuls Lee Jae-myung and Kim Moon-soo. Kim Moon-soo's path to candidacy was initially rocky. The ruling Conservative Party first revoked his nomination. They then reinstated him after their plan to substitute him with former Prime Minister Han Duck-soo fell through. India, amidst escalating tensions with Pakistan and following a diplomatic intervention, agreed to a ceasefire covering land, air, and sea. Despite reports of continued cross-border shelling in Kashmir, President Trump pledged to increase trade with both India and Pakistan and offered to mediate on the Kashmir issue. The U.S. House Foreign Affairs Committee majority lauded Trump as the President of Peace on X. India also gifted 15 electric vehicles to Nepal, recognizing Nepal's role as host of the Sagarmatha Sambad Summit, which addressed climate change and mountain preservation. Peru erupted in celebration as Cardinal Robert Prevost, a familiar figure in Chiclayo due to his past service as bishop, was unexpectedly elected as Pope Leo XIV Vitae. Thousands of Peruvians, especially in Chiclayo, took to the streets to express their joy at the selection of a leader with strong ties to their community. Russia is now at the center of intense diplomatic pressure. President Vladimir Putin faces calls from European leaders and the United States to implement a ceasefire in Ukraine. These leaders, supported by U.S. President Donald Trump, have set a Monday deadline for a 30-day unconditional ceasefire. Failure to comply could trigger increased sanctions and weapon shipments to Ukraine. Ukraine itself is also pushing for an immediate cessation of hostilities. Amidst the threat of escalating sanctions, Putin has suggested direct talks with Kyiv this week as a potential path forward. Pakistan is currently navigating a delicate balance of internal power and external diplomacy, particularly concerning its relationship with neighboring India. Despite accusations from India regarding ceasefire violations, Pakistan maintains its dedication to upholding the Kashmir ceasefire agreement. Simultaneously, Army Chief Azim Munir is reportedly expanding his influence, extending his reach over both governmental functions and the Supreme Court's decisions. Seeking a path towards de-escalation, Pakistan's Prime Minister Sharif has publicly called for peaceful negotiations to address the persistent issues between the two nations. Underscoring this shift, India and Pakistan achieved a consensus on May 10, 2025, agreeing to halt all military activities across land, air, and sea. As a direct consequence of this agreement, Pakistan has fully reopened its airspace to all traffic, indicating a return to standard flight operations managed by the Pakistan Airports Authority. Australia's political landscape sees former Cabinet Minister Ed Husic committing to a constructive role on the backbench. He plans to continue voicing opinions on crucial issues and championing vigorous debate within Labour governments. The nation's cricket scene is in mourning after the death of Bob Cowper, aged 84. Cowper was renowned for scoring the first Australian triple century against England on home soil during an Ashes match. In New South Wales, Australian authorities have intercepted over a ton of cocaine, valued at over $500 million, from a motorboat, leading to the arrest of 5 men. The operation was triggered by a tip regarding a suspicious boat purchase in Sydney. Brazil's President Lula da Silva has arrived in China for a state visit. He will also attend a gathering of Latin American leaders. The visit aims to strengthen ties with both China and the United States. Separately, in Japan, a 17-year-old Brazilian youth was stabbed in Gunma Prefecture. A 17-year-old Japanese high school student has been arrested for attempted murder in connection with the incident. Greenland's political landscape sees Håkon Bossen, a bricklayer, advocating for independence from Denmark. He also supports closer ties with the United States. Bossen, a Donald Trump supporter, is emerging as a political influencer in Greenland. The Philippines is gearing up for its midterm elections, where young voters are actively campaigning to break down the entrenched power of political dynasties. President Marcos is highlighting the nation's recent economic progress. He is also stressing his commitment to safeguarding Philippine territory amid continued disputes with China. Christopher Mr. Malasakit Go is predicted to win a Senate seat. His popularity stems from his association with healthcare centers, aiding impoverished communities. Sri Lanka is in mourning after a passenger bus, overloaded with Buddhist pilgrims, plunged off a cliff near Kotmail. The accident, occurring roughly 140 kilometers east of Colombo in the tea-growing highlands, claimed the lives of 21 individuals. Another 24 people sustained injuries in the tragic incident. Sudan is grappling with escalating violence, as at least 33 individuals have perished in strikes allegedly carried out by the paramilitary Rapid Support Forces, RSF. These attacks encompassed RSF drone assaults on Port Sudan, which serves as the wartime capital for the army-led government. Further strikes hit a prison in El Obeid and a displacement camp situated in Darfur, exacerbating the already dire humanitarian crisis. Bangladesh has taken a firm stance against political unrest, as the interim government has banned all activities of the Awami League. The Anti-Terrorism Act was invoked to enact this prohibition on the former ruling party, which is led by ousted Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina. The ban will stay in place until the conclusion of a trial regarding student deaths, signaling the government's intent to maintain order. Colombia extended asylum to Ricardo Martinelli, Panama's ex-president. He sought refuge in Nicaragua's Panama City embassy after a money laundering conviction. Meanwhile, Panama experienced political tensions surrounding Martinelli's case. His conviction and subsequent asylum created domestic divisions. The situation tested diplomatic relations between Panama, Colombia, and Nicaragua. Albania recently concluded its general elections, where Prime Minister Edi Rama sought a fourth term amidst a campaign heavily focused on the nation's EU aspirations and persistent worries regarding political corruption. Weary voters participated in the parliamentary elections, pitting Rama against a key political rival. Poland is seeing a change in attitude towards Ukrainian refugees. Presidential candidates are now focusing more on Polish citizens' needs. This contrasts with the initial strong support for Ukrainians after Russia's 2022 invasion. Around 1 million Ukrainian refugees remain in Poland. Germany's foreign minister has strongly advocated for a political resolution to the Gaza conflict, underlining the need for hostage release and the protection of Israel. In related news from Germany, Margot Friedländer, a Holocaust survivor who returned from New York and dedicated herself to Holocaust remembrance, has died at 103. Iran's nuclear program is the subject of ongoing talks with the U.S. in Oman, now in their fourth round. The negotiations aim to forge a new nuclear agreement. This agreement would ease Western sanctions. Sanctions relief would likely boost Iran's economy. It could also reshape its political influence in the region. Somalia is grappling with a severe humanitarian crisis as heavy rains and flooding in Mogadishu have claimed at least 7 lives. The intense rainfall overwhelmed the city's infrastructure, severely disrupting transportation by cutting off major roads. Numerous homes and vital infrastructure components have also sustained significant damage, exacerbating the already precarious living conditions for many residents. The United States and China engaged in discussions in Switzerland, aiming to ease the ongoing trade war. New Zealand's strengthening security presence in Asia, exemplified by a recent agreement with the Philippines, is partly attributed to its more assertive stance on China. Iran has declared it will not concede its nuclear rights, even if the United States tries to limit them. Allegedly, Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orbán is orchestrating a smear campaign to damage public opinion towards Ukraine's potential EU membership. Myanmar's junta leader recently met with China's Xi Jinping. China is focusing on infrastructure investments within Myanmar's Shan state, a resource-rich area that is currently under rebel control. The Trump administration once considered accepting a luxury jet as a gift for President Trump from Qatar. Qatar is also currently involved in searching for the remains of Americans killed by the Islamic State in Syria between 2014 and 2017. Heavy flooding in eastern Congo, caused by torrential rains, has resulted in 62 deaths and 50 missing people along Lake Tanganyika, with several villages washed away. In Carrara, Italy, residents are protesting extractivism in the region known for its white marble, where industrial decline threatens the natural landscape. A fire at a chemical plant in northeastern Spain prompted health warnings for 150,000 residents and stay-indoors orders for 5 nearby towns. Nickel miners in Indonesia are raising concerns about potential mass layoffs. This is due to increased mining royalties intended to boost state revenue, but are jeopardizing profits. Rumeysa Öztürk, a Turkish student at Tufts University, was released from an immigration detention center after over 6 weeks of detention related to her political speech. She is now suing over her detention. Activists in Nepal are addressing pad pollution related to women's health, with a factory promoting biodegradable menstrual pads and public education. 5 fishermen, including 3 Peruvians and 2 Colombians, were rescued by an Ecuadorian tuna boat after drifting at sea for 55 days since their departure from Peru in March. They arrived safely at a port in the Galapagos Islands. And that's a wrap for today's news, because even headlines need a nap. Stay curious, stay kind, and let the noise fade as you find your quiet. Take care, stay awesome, and I'll see you next time on WHAM Today.